Final Fantasy 15 is a weird game. It's a game I can always come back to, play multiple times without tiring, just really enjoy as a game. And for a while I was unable to understand why, but in this video I want to show you why this game means so much to me, and maybe even get you to see the game in a different light. This is the first Final Fantasy I played when I realized what the series meant, and I was like, damn, I was excited, to say the least. But the thing that really sent me to Final Fantasy 15 and got me excited was seeing that Altissa trailer. And not the whole Leviathan and shit, falling and everything, the water, not that. The thing that really got me was seeing Noctis take a fight in that and then seeing it flow, not seeing a little screenplay before you go into the fight and a little loading, because when you go into Final Fantasy 9 and 1, there's a little loading screen and it plays the theme. But when Final Fantasy 15 just lets you just run in and just start throw your sword at them and just start the fight, there's no little loading screen, it's just the fight is here. That shit was so cool to me 4 years ago. It's still cool to me now, and I hope that with the newest Final Fantasy they don't regress and that they move forward and use that to their advantage. I love that change. That being said, when I actually got the game, it was open season. I played that game for dumb long. The first thing I want to address is that, man, the start of this game is awful. The opening for Final Fantasy 15 is abysmally long. In the grand scheme of things, all you ever did was break your car, fix your car, drive your car down, almost take a boat, then drive your car back up the road. And me describing that in 5 seconds and then having to actually play that for 5 hours, it is abysmal. The opening of this game is not what I'd call the best Final Fantasy opening. Every time I want to replay this game, the opening always takes me the longest to play, and I always dread playing. I'm like, man, I don't want to get in there and play that opening. It's too much. After you get past that 5-hour intro, you now have the world to explore, with the quest now being head to Lestalem. But that's the first problem with this game. This game prides itself in being an open world game. You have a car, for crying out loud. This is the most realistic Final Fantasy in terms of having roads and shit, and not having everything just be an airship, and you literally having a car. So already, the game is trying to push this open world narrative, but the problem with this is that the world is only open when it feels like giving you the world to explore.
I should warn you, we're about to pass the point of no return. I trust you're not having any second thoughts.
There are so many points in this game where it says, hey, you won't be able to go back to this previous point unless you do this. And I don't really understand why they do that, because in the end of the day, it's like, bro, I just want to play the game. Why can't I go back here? Why can't I go back there? I know it's because narrative things happen, but narratively, I should be able to pause whatever I want to do here to go and do whatever else I want to do. This is where Final Fantasy 15 comes into its biggest problem. It's the confliction between wanting to be a new game and wanting to be an old game. Final Fantasy 15, by design of the game, by so much of what it wants to be the next gen Final Fantasy. It wants to give you options to have action RPGs. It wants you to explore an open world like it's Skyrim or something, but it keeps the same archetype of old Final Fantasies in keeping you locked to certain decisions at times and then leaving the end game for the end of the game. But the problem with it is that while I may be able to get away with that in Final Fantasy 7 or 8 and explore and do the main story and explore the other things on my leisure, bro, it's 15 now. This game came out in 2016. The formula is already there, and I can tell the team really wants to keep their roots to Final Fantasies before, but having this half-assed first step where you kind of want to be a different game, but you also don't want to be a different game for fear of isolating your community, isn't the way to try and make people enjoy your new game. Also, to be honest, the modern conventions of Final Fantasy 15 at times can be really annoying, like how it can be a walking simulator. You slow down to walk through cracks in the wall that don't even really need to be there, and I know they're probably just there to lure and they're a part of the map, but when every section has me crawling at a slow pace, holding forward on my control stick, I'm not really playing the game, am I? That shit needs to get cut out. That just makes the game a lot just worse. Although it wants to be an open world game, all it really lets you do at this point in the game is side quests like the Fisherman, and I do think that some of these side quests in this game are good, but man, are some of them bad. Do some of them literally just go here, collect this, come back. I've had multiple times where it's been a go there, collect this, come back side quest, and I just end up having 8 lines of dialogue to talk to because I've already collected the item that they wanted. These kind of quests aren't good, bro. They don't suffice. Where's my story? Where's the progression? I literally ahead of time went to the Magitech base to get the car part because I'm 10 levels under leveled. I still fight in, you know, managed to scrape out a battle magic, which we'll talk about the combat very soon. But I win and I go to Cindy and she can't actually put the part into my car because having a flying car is only end game content and post game stuff. And stuff like this where just letting your car fly, it may break the game. And I know they have to redesign the game in a sense so that you can't do anything that you can't do right away, but come on, man. Let me do that. Let me play the game at my own pace and take it time. Some people don't like to do all the post game at the end of the game. Some people like to work on it very thoroughly in between, get a little bit of story, get a little bit of side content, and you can do that to an extent in this game. But the side content you're getting will never be more than what it is. And there's some times when the game does really good in the side content, like the entire section with Iris, and she goes like, "Hey, let's go into the forest," and you guys go into the forest and find a whole tomb there. It's stuff like that which I wish the game would do more, but it doesn't. It just leaves that for all end game, just to pad out more time when they could have been implemented properly more in the actual game. So currently, on the agenda, we've established that the first 5 hours of the game not really desirable, and the side quests are kind of meh. So what does this game have to make up for it? And I'll tell you what, although the first 5 hours of the game are entirely, in terms of playing the game, very annoying and tedious, what isn't are the characters. And this is very clearly Final Fantasy 15's most important aspect. It's the characters, man. Initially, this game kind of gives you the deception that all these characters will be kind of one-dimensional trope characters. You can see it. Ignis has glasses, Gladio does not wear a shirt, Prompto never stops talking, and then you quickly see and say to yourself, alright, well, it's about to be Emo Boy and the band of the idiots, right? But the more you play and the more you really interact with the characters and talk to them, and the DLC really has to help with this, but we'll get into that a little bit later, you start to see that more than I'd say any other Final Fantasy, this feels like a group of friends. And don't get me wrong, I'm not here to argue with you which Final Fantasy group is the best. That's just not a conversation I care to have. But what Final Fantasy at this point has always tried to establish is that the characters that you meet in these games, or the characters that are usually in your party, they always usually have nothing to do with each other. They sometimes usually start off hating each other. One of them usually betrays you if possible, and more than anything, it always feels like you're a group of wanderers that just so happen to have similar goals. And in a lot of the game's cases, they don't even have similar goals to you. They just stick with you just because. But Final Fantasy 15 is one of the few games, I say, that actually has the group be a group. Noctis, Ignis, Prompto, Gladio, they're all friends, and you can tell right away from the beginning of the end cutscene to them pushing the card to the very end of the game. These are friends, and the game does not ever try and just tell you they're friends. It does to an extent at certain points. It's like, hey, they're the king's protectors, they're not just his protectors, but they go so much farther than that, and the game really flushes that out, especially in the combat. The combat in this game at first glance can seem really shallow, but I urge you to look into it a little bit more, because in actuality it's actually pretty good. It's a really cool system. However, I do feel like the level up system in the game not being a real level up system kind of detracts from that, because you can end up learning a lot of abilities really late that can help you very early. One such being the emphasis on the team mechanics. Gladio, Promptus, and Ignis all have, you know, like they have team attacks, and in the narrative of the game, they're with you at all times. They're your friends. Yeah, it works like that in combat too. The tech bar that fills up along the side of the screen, you may see it as an addition to combat, but it is the focus. Add to the fact that Noctis has Imperial arms and can wield a multitude of weapons, and I think the combat of this game is really in a good direction. Goods and bads about it. One being that for a lot of enemies' attacks, they don't really have enough animation to show that they're gonna attack unless it tells you on your screen in big buttons, hey, block right now to get a parry, which that's kind of lame too. I'd rather the game just have them flash and then have you lock it in, maybe parry an attack. But other than that, the traction, the combat overall is pretty good, I'd say. You can hit different directions to make Noctis do different things, and you'll quickly learn that the more you play around with the combat, the more it's gonna move with you. For example, you can with Noctis use his regular sword, hold back while you're hitting B, or hold back while you're attacking, and then he'll do a back kick off the enemy. And when he's doing that, now you're in the air and you can do air steps. And if you air step away enough, you'll be able to warp strike in to do extra damage. Warp strike is a very big feature in this game because it's the way Noctis does the most damage. The way the royal arms work is that it basically makes it so that warp strikes all have different mechanics. And I urge you to look into it and see which ones do which, because, you know, it's very easy to look at every sword in the game and every royal arm and just think of it as, oh, just a different weapon that does like the same thing, but it doesn't. They all have different attributes and they all do different things. For example, the trident will leave an after image of you behind, and if you hold down the warp strike button for the katana, it does continuous strikes. It's little stuff like this that, although the combat can look a little bit shallow at first, if you really play it, it was not at all bad for me. At no point when I was playing this game did I think to myself, man, I really wish I could be playing some other game right now, some other action game. That part was never communicated to me in the combat. The ascension system in the game kind of feels like a double-edged sword, because while I do think there are some good options there, and I do think certain power-ups are fine and they should be prioritized, something like stats being a category in there makes no sense. I shouldn't have to use my points to have to level up stats or I get one tap. That literally happened to me in the end of the game where I didn't level one thing and I kept getting one tap at the very end of the game, and I was like, am I playing on a too high of a difficulty? Or it was just really confusing. That being said, I feel like Armiger Chain being Armiger, how you pronounce that? The little super attack mode that he can do, that is incredibly shallow, and I really wish that they just let you use the same form that you use when you fight Leviathan, because it would have controlled better. But it's just some weird rush form that oftentimes ends up not hitting the enemies. But if you're playing Royal Edition, there are also more combat adjustments, which lets you play as Prompto, Ignis, and Gladio. And man, does that really! I never during my playthrough of the game, I never felt like I needed to play as those characters, but I always felt like the option was there, and that's all they ever need to do. And they are all fleshed out characters. If you play the DLC, I can literally imagine myself playing all those characters multiple times. The DLC is very fun to play the characters in. If you put them in the main game and unlock it first, all the characters are a lot of fun to play, and they all have different nuances to them that can make you, that if you don't like Noctis at first, you can maybe try with them and have a little bit more fun with the game. Also, let me preface this real quick because I feel like if I don't, it may evade me later. Man, the PC version of this game sucks. Do not buy the PC version of this game. It runs like shit. This video was supposed to be out last week, but my computer literally broke because I had an i5 and I was recording this game and playing on a 3060 Ti, and I know like i5 is still pretty low comparatively to what you can have, but I could barely get 60 frames in this game with an i5. And it's not a matter of the game being CPU intensive, it's just that so many files are allocated to doing the wrong thing, and the amount of memory the game uses up without actually using the memory is so crazy. Don't buy this game on PC. It's not worth it. Buy it on PS4, buy it on PS5. I get more stable frame rates in this game. I remember when playing on my PS4 than playing on my PC, and my PC is like 10 times more powerful than my PS4. Literally. Now that I have addressed all of the game's basic mechanics and things that I dislike about the game, I want to go into things I like. One of the biggest themes in Final Fantasy 15 is that sometimes the journey is more important than the destination. So when the goal was to go to Altissia from the very start of the game, and you actually get there 15 hours later, just for Luna to die and Ignis to lose his eyesight, I became kind of worried. I saw the sudden shift in tone of the game and thought to myself, this is where the game falls apart. This is where they try to make this game a super emo game about loss and a bunch of other stuff that really wouldn't play into its hand that much, but would probably make a story that I'll forget in 2 days. However, after seeing the story progress, I was instantly relieved.
I'm here, aren't I? Maybe when you're not too busy moping, you can look around and give a shit about someone worse off than you. Let go of me. How's that ring fit you? You rather carry it around than wear it? She gave her life so you could do your duty, not so you could sit around feeling sorry for yourself. You don't think I know that? You don't! Ignis took one for you too. And for what? Enough!
You don't just see this in cutscenes, you see it in the actual gameplay too. In the entirety of the next dungeon, if you try and move too fast ahead of the group, Gladio will yell at you because Ignis has now lost his sight, and of course, now you guys can't just move ahead.
Is it too much to ask the royal procession sticks together? Too much to ask you to shut it?
This is one of the things that Final Fantasy does the best. It shows the impact of what happens. It never just shows the events that occurred and goes like, oh, well, it happened, time to get over it. You can see the results of everybody's lives immediately. Whether it be Ignis losing his sight, or Gladio leaving the group for a little bit, and then you having to do the next dungeon with a different party member and just realizing that it's not working the same. You're not getting the same damage. It's how the gameplay is willing to mirror the story that you're playing through. And instead of the game using this to force a sense of pity onto you, it instead uses it to strengthen the characters.
A moment.
Is everything okay?
It bloody well isn't. And I won't suffer this pointless bickering in silence any longer. Let's be frank. My vision hasn't improved, and probably won't. Yet in spite of this, I would remain with you all. To the very end.
Sorry, but I object. War is a matter of life and death.
But we'll be there.
It's not about us looking out for him.
Uh-huh. Well, then he should be free to choose.
There's more to it than just what he wants.
I know full well. I won't ask you to slow down. If I cannot keep up, I will bow out.
What says His Majesty?
Noct, you are king. One cannot lead by standing still. A king pushes onward, always, accepting the consequences and never looking back. Gladio, Noct will take his rightful place, but only once he's ready.
Have it your way. We're still taking a big risk. We better all be ready.
Especially in the DLC they show this, which is what I want to talk about right now. The DLC for Final Fantasy 15 was a very pleasant surprise to me as I played the game on launch and didn't get to experience it the first time, because it really showed me that a lot of the good parts of the game that I really enjoyed were there on purpose. Like the story, the gameplay, all of it was good. The mechanics they used to try and flesh out the other mainline characters like Gladio, Prompto, and Ignis were all amazing. Having Prompto section be like Noctis' section in the one chapter that is the worst chapter in the game, but rewriting it to be fun so that you're still in a Magitech base, but because you have guns and you're using that as the gameplay, it just makes it a lot more enjoyable. Seeing them be able to take a section that I previously hated in the game as my least favorite section and then recreate it to be something that is actually a lot of fun with a different character and different mechanics was really cool to see. But just not gameplay wise, everything wise, like story wise, what it means for these characters, whether it's minuscule or more. Seeing Gladio need to take this trial, he wasn't in a place where he was able to help Noctis, and just that realization himself of his own weakness, not because he wants to be strong for himself, but because he wants to be strong for one of his friends. That's impactful. That shows something to me. And it's not just that for the DLC. Every DLC that's put all had good features. Prompto's different from everybody else, but him realizing that his differences are what makes him who he is, and that just because everybody in the group is different, that actually furthers their bond as friends and brothers. And even Ignish's DLC, which, you know, had a lot to do because it was gonna basically cover how Ignis went blind. And the plot twist that they did, him taking the burden of Noctis, that was all good. The side story was a little bit weird, but him taking the burden of Noctis, him doing everything that he did to be who he was, that was a really good part in the DLC. But more than anything, Ignis during the main story suggesting that the group should turn back and stop fighting, but now you remember that part of the story, and with context that Ignis saw the vision of Noctis dying, you now realize that Ignis only suggested them turning back so that Noctis wouldn't have to die. All for it to even still happen in the end of the story. It's stuff like that that makes you look at these characters, look at the story, look at the world as a whole. It makes you appreciate them. It's stuff like that which makes this game my second favorite game of all time, because although its only goal was to just make another Final Fantasy, which was just a group about people saving the world, it decided to give me a story about friends that had to save the world despite only wanting to be friends. Every single one of the DLCs was able to add a new mechanic to the game while making it feel original. Arden's DLC, I will say, on a story perspective, was the worst one because it didn't really do anything besides try and like retcon a couple of things, but even then it kind of failed at doing that because it doesn't make sense for Arden to have the motivation that he does to do what he does. But we'll talk about Arden after this and how he's probably the worst part about Final Fantasy narrative wise. Even Arden's DLC, which letting you explore Insomnia gameplay wise is one of my favorite DLCs in the whole entire pack. All of these DLCs are fun. My only complaint with them is that they should be added to the main game. There's a lot of points in these DLCs where at least for Ignis, if you add to the main game, it kind of defeats the purpose, but for a lot of these DLCs, it could have been reworked so that they were in the game. For example, take out that weird survival horror part of Noctis's journey and let you play as Prompto and seeing him get back to them and then get captured. That would instantly make that part negligible and make me enjoy the game a lot more and not have that part on my mind. Or when Gladio leaves the group, when you're ready to take the airship back to Lestalem, being able to play as him in that moment would also be really cool. Like, all of these DLCs, my biggest complaint is that they're not ingrained into the main story, even with this being the definitive edition of the game, and I feel like that being the case, they could have just made them in the main story and it would have been a lot more fun. Not saying that they could have done that originally because obviously time constraints, but I mean, now with Royal Edition, I think there's no excuse to keep them all in the main game and tie it all up together instead of having to drop down to a different menu and select them. Along with the changes that was brought with the DLCs, Royal Edition also changed Insomnia and allowed for a playable version of it that wasn't in the main game. And in terms of that expansion, I think it's cool to see Core at the very end of the game and to see him past that, but man, is that just not good. The side quests being in the city, I didn't even bother doing any of them because it's like, bro, it's not worth it. Why am I doing that? But one bad thing that has happened from this change is taking away the feeling of finality. I remember the feeling in the original Final Fantasy 15 when it's just the end. You're walking towards the city, all you have to hear is the opening theme, but playing through a dead city that's supposed to be yours, it's impactful. Walking through that and hearing that song so quietly, but knowing that this is about to be the final fight for your life, that's good narrative, that's good gameplay, that's a good game. But seeing that switched out for a gauntlet of enemies to then be switched out again for a fight against Cerberus twice for no reason, to then get to the real good boss, which is Ifrit, which, man, the song in that fight, just amazing. The entire fight, just great. But to then have that fight be prolonged by like 2 or 3 extra hours for minuscule storytelling and an overall worse last lead up to the fight is pretty disappointing. That being said, along with those changes, you also get to fight 4 or 3 battles before you actually get to the throne room now, and I think all those battles are pretty good. The battle against the Guardian, which you later figure out to be Somnus once you play the DLCs, was a good addition, and all those fights were pretty good if you ask me, but overall, I'd say that they already had it golden originally. Insomnia wasn't the problem that they needed to work on in the main game, and you already play Insomnia to an extent when you played the Arden DLC, so I feel like the implementation of it here wasn't that good. They could have left out and left it as they did with the base game. The final confrontation with Noctis and Arden is decent. I feel like Arden as a villain overall isn't that good because the way you're introduced to him, you automatically know he's evil. You can hear the music, you see this motherfucker, the game tells you follow him or you die, the game then tells you hey, he's a Chancellor, and then all of a sudden he kills Luna and you're like, wait, he was evil all along? Big surprise, but I knew he was evil the second I seen this slimy motherfucker. But for the game to then, you know, lean into how evil he was towards the end of the game felt kind of weird because it was like, why is he taunting me when previously he did all this? And then going into the DLC and seeing his backstory and seeing that everything was taken from him and all this stuff, it really didn't matter because they then tried to replace his hatred for Samus's bloodline with being this was all preordained by the crystal to be the final battle. And to be honest, that was the worst plot decision I think they could have ever done because, in my opinion, none of that matters. You can remove crystals and all that other shit and the chocobos and all that shit from Final Fantasy 15 and it'd still be a good game about a strong narrative between friends that make it through to the end. And I know that sounds pretty cheesy by the way I just said it, but play the game and you'll realize it's different from what I just said. But then to have the game say that, oh, fate is the main decision to everything, it kind of doesn't matter because, like I said before, I still feel like the strongest part about this game's theming is the fact that the journey will always outweigh the destination. And then seeing that be one of the main focuses of the game, and then still hearing the decision that they made in terms of Arden's plot, it just makes me not really like the character. And although I do sympathize for him, it feels like the DLC and his actual actions that he makes in the main game are so separate from one another that it doesn't make sense. Like, him killing Luna Freya, I know why he did it, but it's like, bro, especially with her literally being a descendant from Era, why would you do that? You know, like, it's little things like that overall in the story that make me realize how much of a cooler character he could have been and how much he probably was planned to be, but didn't really pan out overall. And they do try and like take a cool approach to him by going like, hey, him demonifying people turned him slightly evil or slightly crazy, but they don't really play into that crazy. I don't see that crazy. I'm told about it, and then that automatically makes him like a worse character. But none of that matters for how the game ended. Final Fantasy XV's ending is one of the most satisfying endings I've ever seen in my life, because in the end of the day, once you get to a part of the game and you know Noctis is gonna die, it's just like, damn, you know, what can you really do? You know that fate is there, and like I said, back to the whole destination and journey thing, it just sucks. But to then see him before he goes into the throne room say that, Prompto, can I get one picture for the ride? And seeing that entire conversation and seeing the rest of the crew know what's happening, and then the campfire scene, bro, it's further solidifying that, bro, it doesn't matter what happens to Noctis because they'll never forget the times that they had. And then the final cutscene where when Regis has to plunge his own sword into his son because of the role that his bloodline played into it. It feels kind of like the greater enemy was never Arden. It was somewhat, you know, the fate of the world and the crystal itself, but like I said, they chose the end they chose. Having all that happen for Noctis to finally realize his destiny and claim being a king, which was so far eluded from him in the beginning, and which his dad never raised him to be, is a really great ending. And then, despite all that, to see this happen,
Thank you.
It just speaks to how great Final Fantasy 15 is, which further solidifies why Final Fantasy 15 is still one of the best Final Fantasies I've ever played, and is a great game that you should consider giving a try.